This is what we call an Edge Burst event. We do these a few times throughout the year. For tonight's topic, which is on community development, how to build a city, no better person to open us up with a few remarks than Indianapolis's 49th mayor, Mayor Joe Hogsett. So can you help me welcome Joe Hogsett?
We're on a roll in Indianapolis, and we have a lot to be excited about. And I look forward to the conversation and the fruits of tonight's meeting. We know where we are. Where do we see ourselves going? And that's what nights like tonight are all about. Thank you for having me. God bless you.
So why this topic? Why community development and how to build a city? We do these burst events a few times a year. It's a way for us to bring kind of all of Edge Nation together. It's really a love for the city. And it's a belief and a common vision that the only way we're going to advance the city is to bring together a diverse set of leaders from across generations, across industries, for the common good. So real quick, panel introductions. I'll ask the questions, they'll talk. Up here to my left, I've asked each of them to do kind of a 60-second bio, but you just heard from Joanna Taft with Harrison Center for the Arts. Next to her is Allison Millington, SVP with Home and Motorsports. Brian Payne with Central Indiana Community Foundation, and Christian Anderson with High Alpha. I'd love for you guys, just anything I left out, you just want to run down real quick on kind of your own career bios?
I'll just talk about the Harrison Center for a second. We are home to 36 artists and 4 galleries that change art monthly, but we're not just an art center. We like to think of ourselves as a cultural development corporation. We look into the community, we see a challenge, and we come up with a distinctively cultural solution. So we started here in high school because we needed a new generation of art patrons. We call them world-class citizens to the lay people like you. But anyway, so we did that to grow a market for ourselves and to serve our city. We started the City Gallery to help the neighborhood, or the city with the neighborhood stabilization project. So we do big things like that, but we also do small things like porch parties, and we're partnering with the IMS on that, and other creative placemaking activities.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm not a Hoosier. I'm originally a Maniac. I'm from Maine. Anybody from Maine? No Maniacs in here with me? Okay, and then I went to college in Colorado, at Colorado State. I moved to Indiana in 1983 for a job. I'm a product of the sports movement. I was working in Colorado Springs at the U.S. Olympic Committee when the city moved a lot of sports organizations here. I moved here as a part of that with USA Gymnastics, and was here a year and a half and said, this is the place I want to stay. I want to stay here forever and build a career and get the people, and I just loved the spirit of the community. So I've been here ever since. So I think I'm a Hoosier now, right? 34 years or whatever that is. So my first part of my career was at USA Gymnastics. I ran events all over the world, and then wanted to be home more, got married, had a child, and then I was at the Indiana Sports Corp for 14 years. Amazing organization. Love that place. They do amazing things for the city. Then I went to the Super Bowl. Was there 4 years. At the end of that, in 2012, I went back to the Sports Corporation for a couple of years as president, and now I am at Home and Motorsports in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Last year we did the 100th running of the Indy 500, which was a great opportunity for me to work on the largest global event. And then this year, coming up in just 33 days, we have the 101st running.
I'm from the opposite coast of Allison. I grew up in San Diego, and I moved here 23 years ago to be the managing director of the Indiana Repertory Theater, which was a life-changing opportunity for me. And I did that for 7 years, and then I got a chance to become the president and CEO of the Central Indiana Community Foundation and the Indianapolis Foundation. My passion has always been cities. My hobby is to explore cities from around the world and kind of try to understand them as much as possible from how residents understand that city. I'm not really interested in the tourist experience. I'm really trying to figure out the soul of the city for the residents and try to connect into that. And then I make a quick, sometimes ignorant judgment after 3 days about whether I could ever live in that city. And I came out here in 1993 for an interview at the IRT, and I had never been closer to Indianapolis than Phoenix or Washington, D.C. And they only wanted me out here for the interview for 1 day, but I said I planned 3 days because I needed 3 days to figure it out. And after those 3 days, I'd fallen in love with Indianapolis. and that was in 1993. So I'm a huge advocate of how great our city is and how much greater it can be. I would say that I'm in the middle of a kind of a transformation, a transition myself right now, where my passions have been hanging out with, I still love hanging out with creative people. That's kind of one of the big privileges of my career, is I get to hang out with amazingly creative people. 4 of them with Dave as kind of the founding CEO of Edge. I'm hanging out with tonight and so many of you. But I'm at a transition point from wanting our city to be so great at developing and attracting the best and the brightest. And it's developing, attracting, and retaining. But I think we're doing, not that we have to give up, but I think I'm in a moment where I think we need to rebalance a little bit. And the rebalance is kind of what Mayor Hogsett talked about, where I think we need to put a little bit more effort on developing and creating more inclusive opportunities for our own residents. And we still want to attract the best and the brightest from other places, but we need to make sure we find the right balance between attracting people from other places and developing and giving opportunities to our own residents, many of which don't get those opportunities. And so that's becoming a new passion of mine.
Awesome. Which it's a luxury for us to be thinking about rebalancing. It means that we're doing something right on the other end. To get to the point where we're like, okay, enough of that, or so I'm really encouraged.
No more obviously cool people from elsewhere.
Yeah, we're done. So, first of all, I won't say a whole bunch of nice stuff about the folks I'm seated up here with for the balance of the evening, but I have to get this out of the way, which is all 3 of these people are heroes of mine. I've met all of them at different points in my career as I was kind of coming up. Joanna first, who honestly gave me a ton of opportunities to engage with community at Redeemer and then the Harrison Center, and gave me a lot of credit for stuff I didn't deserve. And Allison and Brian, you're heroes of mine. So it is awesome to be here with you 3. So top that, suckers. My name's Christian. I'm a native New Yorker that grew up outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, and was educated in the fine state of Indiana. I'm married. I got 6 kids. Scout, Daisy, Indiana. Dixie, Dolly, and Violet. You will all be glad to hear none of them are with us tonight. So you have a grown-up evening. It'll be fantastic. I'm a designer by trade, and through a series of serendipitous, kind of backwards events, ended up getting involved in entrepreneurship and venture capital ultimately, and have become kind of a very amateur student of cities and economic development. And I don't get paid for it, but it's one of my very favorite things to think about and talk about. So looking forward to tonight.
All right, there's our panel. Let's go ahead and dig in, okay? And remember, we'll save some time for a few questions at the end. So tweet any questions that you might have, we'll take them live from the room. So first question, I think in order to have this conversation, we need to start with the thought processes that went into getting Indianapolis to where we are today. So what sort of mindset or characteristics stand out to you about the leaders who have helped shape Indy into what it is today?
I'll take it. Well, the way I understand it, in 1967, anyone been involved in Penrod when Penrod was created? Not back that far, but now. So Penrod, I believe that Penrod was the first time our community and the citizens at the time, led by Ted Boehm, pulled together to create sort of a volunteer effort where across the board we had collaboration and community leaders that were civically engaged, not government, but volunteers at a civic level come together to create something great. And obviously Penrod's been successful for years and years, but it set the city on a path to be able to pull residents together, provide leadership opportunities. We had the city, and it still is, the right size to be able to really make an impact. That exercise they went through and the success they had then led to different things where the community could pull together and could get things done, learning along the way. But I think back to your question, collaboration, innovation, entrepreneurship goes all the way back to the start of Penrod, because then we've used that model over and over again. In the sports, we've used it in attracting the National Sports Festival in 1982, which kind of put us on the global map, the 1987 Pan Am Games, Super Bowl, and so forth. So we created a model and an importance of civic volunteerism back then that could then cause impact. So I think things that the city still stands for, that real passionate volunteerism, innovative thinking, entrepreneurship, passion, creativity, started way back then and it's continued.
One of the things that I think is so amazing about Indianapolis, and certainly isn't the way in many other Midwestern cities, and probably isn't the way in most cities in America, is that you can come here from anywhere and say, hey, I'm new to Indianapolis, I want to get involved, I want to help make this city even better, and people will just kick the doors open for you to do that. I was talking to a young woman who's 23. We had an event at CICF, and she came with, she's newly working for the Caramita environmental engineering firm. And she's had that the same experience. She's been here for 4 months, she's from New York, and she is already incredibly connected after 4 months. And you know, she has the kind of personality that, you know, makes it maybe a little bit easier. But I know that when I first moved here, I was talking to people who were from Cincinnati. And I knew some people who'd moved to Cincinnati in 1993. And it was like, if you did not go to a high school in Cincinnati, and your family was not from Cincinnati, forget about it. I mean, actually, it's been a long time since I've seen this gentleman. He was the president of PSI, Public Service Indiana, which is now part of Duke. And Joe, great guy. Anyway, we'll remember his name in a minute. So anyway, Joe Hale, thank you very much. So Joe Hale moved when PSI got bought by Synergy and then became Duke. Well, he moved to corporate headquarters at Synergy in Cincinnati. And Joe Hale was a major corporate leader here and was, 48 years old, very sophisticated guy, moved to Cincinnati, and it took him like 10 years to get any kind of civic assignment in Cincinnati because he wasn't from there. And so the fact that my first week being from California, by the way, at the time being from Santa Cruz, California, that's where I was running a Shakespeare festival, and Santa Cruz was kind of a communist nation back, it still is actually, but people in Indianapolis in 1993 embraced this guy from communist California, Little Berkeley, and completely kicked doors open for me and embraced me, and 7 years later made me the president of their community foundation. I mean, that's crazy, and that's special, and that's one great thing about Indianapolis. And I think it's, I don't know if it's always been that way, but maybe it's the sport, maybe it's Penrod and the sports and this volunteer effort that created that. I don't really know when that started, but I felt it when I moved here 23 and a half years ago, and I talk to people who feel it every day as they come from other places. Anybody else on that one?
We can keep moving. That's a great start. So, what makes Indy unique? We touched on this a little bit already, but what aspects make it such a great community? And everyone talks about the role that sports has played, and obviously it's played a massive role in elevating Indianapolis's economic and cultural profile. But maybe what are some of the other elements beyond sports even that have played into our growth as a community?
I'll kick us off if you'd like to win. One of the things is how ununique Indianapolis has been historically. So you look at a place like Cincinnati that has kind of and I'm going to say disparaging things about other cities just to make a point here, with apologies to all you folks in the Queen City, but it's quite impressed with itself, right? Kind of in a vacuum, in an insular way. People love Cincinnati. They love the neighborhood they grew up in. Procter & Gamble's the greatest CPG company on the face of the earth. They were almost the capital of the United States. I mean, if y'all don't have friends from Cincinnati and don't want to hear this story about how they were almost the capital of the United States, then I suggest you don't expand your network at all, because it's a big part of the narrative. And you look at Detroit and its background and trappings and the underpinnings of that economy as it was attached to the automobile industry, and on down the line, Kansas City with cows and the whole enchilada, okay? Indy, the whole Indian no place thing was rooted in this sense that it really didn't have a strong identity, certainly an industrial identity, right? It might have had a cultural identity, in some negative ways like the rest of the Midwest. But when you look at kind of like where innovation comes from, rarely is it the experts that innovate in their own field. It's almost always coming from someone outside that doesn't know the rules. Almost always. And so when I think about the rise of Indy, if we want to mark that like line of demarcation, like late 60s, but then it really catching fire in the kind of mid 80s and then to today, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it wasn't having to fight a legacy identity. It wasn't trying to figure out how not to alienate the auto manufacturers while ushering in new types of industries. And I think you still see that today. You know, I was with some folks from Minneapolis today, and they were basically, you know, we were just talking about why is there so much startup activity in Indianapolis? Why are there so many kind of newco starts? Why is it easy, or where does the abundance of the talent and the relative ease with which you can attract that talent, what do you ascribe that to? And they said, we're in Minneapolis. We have 16 Fortune 500s. We should be killing you. And you know, my thought was, that's the reason you're not killing us, is because you've got 16 Fortune 500s. Now, that was a great thing to have for the last 60 years. It will not necessarily be a great thing to have for the next 60, because the net new 16 Fortune 500s are going to come from communities like this. So just structurally, I think that's something we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. We don't think of that as an edge, if you'll pardon the pun. But I think the fact that we kind of didn't have that legacy has ended up powering a lot of our current growth.
So that was awesome. I'm going to say something that's very grassroots, different end of the spectrum here, my answer. So last year, Visit Indy went to New York, and they were trying to get reporters to come and write about Indianapolis. And they were pitching different ideas. And they pitched the food scene, they pitched all these other things, and the reporter was like, well, you're describing every city. You know, it sounded like those things were happening in every city. So the Visit Indy person said, you know, we porch in Indianapolis. And the reporter was like, what? Yeah, you know, porching. Porching is a thing in Indianapolis. And she's like, what? So I ended up hosting a reporter from New York City on my porch. I have a very simple porch, folks, okay? They just thought it was the most exotic experience. So I think that one of the things that makes us unique, or could make us unique, is that we embrace community and we embrace connecting, and everybody longs to be connected. And the more we can get better at connecting through things like porching and these other things, that's going to make us unique.
Let me just brag on her for a second. We partnered together last year with the Speedway and Joanna to create these porch parties for the 100th running of the Indianapolis 500, because our state has a huge history with this race. Indianapolis, it's very important. And working together, we got 519 different porch parties to sign up and have a party. And then when you multiply all those people, it was about 150,000 people that we connected through just having porch activities, neighborhood gatherings, porch parties. And even though it was around a sporting event, it's about this part of it that's more important, about connecting people, connecting residents, getting them together. Because the more relationships you have with the people around you, the easier you can solve problems and so forth. So we're all really big relational people up here, and having excuses to create those kind of programs is really important.
It's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about it cities. So we all probably know what makes an it city, or what are some of the it cities out there right now. Austin, Nashville, Portland, maybe some of your friends are moving there. 15, 20 years ago it was Seattle, Starbucks rise. Indy's not there yet, but how might we become an it city, and then how would we sustain that?
Challenge his core assumption, Alice.
Passive Christian, he has something to say.
Okay, I'm going to challenge it too.
Yeah, so I would say, Brian was kind enough to invite me to speak to some of his SKL cohort last week, and so you're going to hear this for the second time in 5 days, Brian. But I would say that we First of all, I don't have a dog in the hunt. I'm not from here. I don't have any kinfolk here. To me, I feel like I bring a layer of objectivity to this dialogue that is almost unparalleled. With the exception of me naming my son Indy. But I do, in fact, think that Indy is probably considered an it city now. And I like your humility, though, Dave. It is, and of course, there's lots of different optics you can view it through, but I'll share with you real briefly. I don't know how many of you religiously read all of the Brookings Institute reports that come out on a quarterly basis. I know I do. And there was one that was, I don't know, came out maybe 4 weeks ago, just talking about net migration and job growth, specifically in the tech sector. And when you talk about Portland and Austin and Nashville, those cities, as the tech industry goes, that serves as a bit of a proxy for kind of broader economic development in those cities. And Indy was cited really as one of 3 exceptions to the rule, which was the kind of the rich are getting richer. So the Bay Area is growing just as fast or even faster than it had been historically. Boston and New York kind of maintain their growth trajectories. But it cited 3 cities that are kind of busting the model, and it's Phoenix, Dallas, and Indianapolis, in terms of just the amount of, and the specific measurement they were looking at was net new tech job growth, right? Which is quite a meaningful indicator. These cities outside of the hardcore world-class cities we have in North America, whatever your definition of world-class is, New York, San Francisco, etc. But the Portlands and the Austins, they hold their crowns in a much more transient fashion. If you look at the long arc of time, you'll see these kind of regional or kind of mid-market or tier 2 cities will kind of pop their head up for a couple of decades, and then something else will come into fashion. And so the opportunity for Indy right now, I think, is profound in that we are trending, we're actually adding those jobs on a relative basis faster than any other city in the country. And that creates a huge opportunity that transcends tech, and I know Brian will touch on some of this in a minute, but that window is not open forever. So you have to kind of make hay while the sun shines. And so I have like a bit of just an admonition for this group, which is there's a lot of terrific stuff happening here, and when terrific stuff starts to happen, you get a platform to do even bigger things. And if you don't kind of seize that opportunity, if you don't live into that ambition level, at the municipal level, at the corporate level, at the community level, at the individual level, it's a squandered opportunity. And I could point to several other cities that I think kind of missed the boat. And so it's a unique time to live here in Indianapolis. And I think it's important that we recognize that we are on kind of the beginning of that upward slope of it. Like, I think we've arrived, but we're vectoring in the right direction.
Yep.
I'm hoping that we have just arrived, and I hope that because I'm more optimistic if we're not too far along, that we can be more thoughtful about how to sustain, which was part of Dave's question, how to sustain being in its city as opposed to being it and then actually either overheating or underheating and finding that right balance. I have my 2 oldest friends that I grew up with in San Diego, and they've been my friends since 2nd grade, so we're actually, I think, going to be celebrating 50 years of friendship as I get together with them in Vancouver, Canada in August. And one lives in Seattle and one lives in Portland. I spent a lot of time in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver. 3 cities that I have loved madly at times. And I actually don't love them anymore. And in Vancouver, last time I was at Vancouver, I saw the same thing happening now in Vancouver that I've seen in Seattle and Portland, is that they've overheated. People buy houses there that don't live there, which means real estate prices are going up, and people are investing instead of living. And now the people who really live there and love the place can't afford to live there. And and then my colleague who runs the Seattle Community Foundation in February at our national conference told me that there's 2 Seattles. There's the Seattle of all the people who've moved into Seattle to work at, name the company, right? Amazon, Microsoft, name all the companies, and the people who are really from Seattle. And they do not interact. They don't get along. They have different worldviews about what should be happening in the community. And I hope that never happens to Indianapolis, because what I love most is our sense of community. Now, we have to expand our sense of community to more and more people. To more and more people who've lived here for generations and maybe are part of living and being born into some of that generational poverty. We need to figure that out and make sure that Indianapolis is a land of connectivity and opportunity for more and more people who are from here for a long time and generations. But I still feel that we are in a moment where we can do that. And so I feel like we have got to take a different course than these other cities that have been in cities before us. We have to have the courage to buck conventional wisdom. And frankly, I've been not Christian because he's such a big thinker. I mean, you are, but I actually was worried until last week about whether our business leaders would be a problem in this bucking conventional wisdom. But last week, I heard Tom Linebarger, CEO of Cummins, twice in 2 different settings, talk very passionately about extending economic opportunity to all. And then David Johnson, CEO of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, was very passionate and articulate about how 16 Tech in this neighborhood needs to serve the residents of this neighborhood. And then I heard Richard Florida be brought to town, who has a whole different perception of the rise of the creative class, and he presented his new book called The New Urban Crisis, where he's basically saying we need to rethink how we build our cities so more people can stay and enjoy the quality of life that we are building in cities. So anyway, and that was at the Chamber annual dinner. So our business leaders seem to be completely embracing this, and that gives me a tremendous amount of hope.
That's great. Dovetailing off of Brian's comment about 2 Seattles, how do we begin to make progress between the haves and have-nots in this community? This is something Mayor Hogg hit on as well.
I'm going to respond from a very personal perspective. So a couple of years ago, if you had talked to me about equity, I would have listed all the good things I had done, and I would have I wouldn't have had a lot of things to add to the conversation. I would have been defending that we were doing all the right things already. But something has happened in the last couple of years, and now I am asking, what else can I do? And how can I be more equitable? So a program that the Harris Center is coming up, so we're working with neighbors on trying to envision a neighborhood the way they ought to be. And you do this through quality of life planning. And we've decided as an arts center, because there's a community challenge, we're coming up with a cultural solution, we're going to actually help them envision through theater. So we've invented a new kind of theater called pre-enactment theater. And pre-enactment is acting out the way things ought to be. So we're taking a 3-block stretch, and set designers are going to build temporary buildings, and the actors will actually act out. It's kind of like going to Conner Prairie, and seeing the reenactors, except they won't be old-fashioned costumes. They'll be pre-enacting what a just and equitable society is. So how do we begin to change? We begin with ourselves, but we also begin, hopefully, the Harrison Center and others, by creating a model so people know what to do. Like, have you ever wondered, well, how do I change, or how do I become more equitable? Well, what if we can model it so that we learn how to do it and we teach others how to do it?
I think, from my perspective, education is critical, and we've had a lot of progress the last 2 years and traction on pre-K and on K through 12. I think I saw the other day, of the 45,000 students that are in the geographic area of IPS, only 15,000 of those students go to a school that's been ranked in A or B. Well, that leaves a lot of kids that are behind. And until we can get that balanced, which it's on better traction now than it's been in a while, I think we're going to continue to have the have and the have-nots problem in this community. We've got a couple great things happening in that space, though. Recently, IPS and Dr. Farabee partnered with David Harris at the Mind Trust, and they are working very hard on sort of innovative school programs, which are different than the way we've thought about it before, And together, in a great collaboration, IPS and the Mind Trust are going to make some great progress on this topic in the future. But for me, education is absolutely critical at the pre-K and the K-12 level for us over time to address this issue.
I've had a series of aha moments over the last couple of years, and one of them is this idea of the power of networks. You know, I mean, we know about the power of networks in IT, we know about the power of networks in physical connectivity, and of course, edge mentoring is the power of networks from, you know, humans helping humans. And that's really what I think we need to do, is we need to figure out how people who have the connections, the 1 degree, I mean, it's really a 1 degree of separation for many of us in Indianapolis, which we love, mostly unless you're at Costco and you hit 8 people in the morning and you haven't showered yet, which happens every once in a while. But mostly that's a great thing. But you know what? Not everyone is networked into the positive networks that probably almost all of you are networked into. And so how do we share our networks to people who do not have that opportunity yet? And I had one of my heroes is Diamond Hargis. You guys, who knows Diamond? If I could see a show of hands. So Diamond is known as many things. One is he was the roving listener in Mapleton Fall Creek, working with the Broadway United Methodist Church at 30th and Broadway. And now he lives near MLK and 33rd Street. And I was at his house again, and I always have a transformative experience when I'm at Diamond's house. And it was billed as a house concert. But it was, of course, so much more than that. There was great music. There was neighbor. It was all about, Diamond's all about finding the special gifts that neighbors have to give to each other and to their neighborhood. And I've known this, but every one of us as a human being has special gifts. He's just a genius at bringing it out and celebrating it in community and neighborhood. And I was so impressed with what everyone I met, actually, but 7 or 8 people were lifted up that night. He had like bios of people that were printed up and what they were doing in the community, their projects. I mean, these were incredibly talented, creative, cultural entrepreneurs, a phrase I've learned from Joanna Taft over the years and I love. These are great cultural entrepreneurs in the neighborhood. And they're making incredible things happen, and they try to raise $300 or $400 to make this next incredible thing happen. I want to network, I want to learn from those people, and I want to network them into a bigger scale of impact somehow. And of course, do it appropriately. My first thought, of course, is running a foundation is, oh my gosh, you know, I could just go and give them each, you know, $5,000, and that would just be so awesome. But you know what they need more than the $5,000 is they need the attention and the connectivity and actually my participation. I need to show up. I need to shut up and show up. And then from there, learn what I can do with the resources and network I have to help them do what they want to do. And there's so many people like that in this community, and they're doing great stuff with so little resources and such a small network to the rest of us, and we got to figure how to connect.
I love it. I'll just real quick tag onto that, which is, I love this network idea because in the world of computer science, it's called Metcalfe's Law. Do y'all know what that? Any nerds in the room? Which is the value of a network is the square of its number of nodes. So every time you add one node, it has an exponential impact on the value of the network. And the idea, and I think about like entrepreneurship, the currency of entrepreneurship is not capital, venture capital, it's access. It's the network. It's can you get a meeting with that VP of sales, you know, or that regulator in DC. I mean, I'm kind of having an epiphany as you're talking, because one of the things that you and I've talked about just over the last month is this, what is Indy like great at indigenously, and like what's true about it that we don't have to fake or import or lie or launch a campaign to change people's hearts and minds, like just what's true. And it's what we've been talking about since the first question, which is it's an easy place, it's an accepting place. And you know, I grew up in the Deep South, which in spite of like what country music might tell you is actually a fairly inhospitable place to outsiders. And I think it's one of the reasons I fell in love with Indy so much was coming here and folks like not caring, what your last name was or you went to college and things of that nature. And when I think about what is true, what is special, and apologies for ending on kind of like a rah-rah note here, but I think the opportunity for us is to be famous for the democratization of opportunity. And today, that's basically true if you fit a pretty broad demographic profile, but it is not true for anything on either side of the fat middle of the bell curve, right? And so thinking about how we grow networks, how we connect people in our lives who are unconnected, how we have to be, if we want to see this change, you have to be willing to suffer for it. And those of you who know me know that I talk about this notion of how I hate it when people use the word passion, because we have a wrong understanding of what the word means. We think it means stuff that I love and that, like I'm passionate about basketball, but passion comes to the Latin root passeo, which means to suffer. And if we're passionate about Indianapolis, and if we're passionate about democratizing opportunity, we can't just send a check. You know what I mean? We have to kind of be willing to suffer for it. And part of that is giving of your wealth. And when I think about what my wealth is, it's my network. And I think that I'm very liberal with it in some aspects of my life and very stingy with it in others. So that's a good admonition.
Some good words. I want to cut to some Q&A. Before we hop on Twitter, we'll get a couple questions in here. Missed your chance. Oh wait, I saw one in the back. Joe Rusk, you shot it out?
Yeah, definitely. So, you talk about big picture ideas. I grew up outside of Seymour, Indiana. We kind of had a methodology called neighbors helping neighbors. I kind of didn't feel that right when I moved to Indianapolis, and I still see it. So I'm wondering, what causes that in a bigger city, and then what can we do to change that?
My experience has been that our whole culture has suffered from the effects of suburbanization. So, people go home and they drive into their garage and they enter their house from their garage, or they hang out in their backyard, or and those are things that have affected our whole culture. And so we try to our family and our friends, we try to intentionally be on our front porch and intentionally be in the front yard. So that's one thing. I think that's one of the reasons that has caused it. Also air conditioning and TVs, those are other things that have caused it. But I think that you need to say to yourself, what can you do to change it? And who can you invite over? And how, instead of waiting for them to come to you, I think that it's really hard work, because this is something that has, we need a cultural change. But the fact that you see it and the fact that you've experienced what community really is, you can really bring that to your neighbors.
You got a question on Twitter there?
Sure do, guys. What's a crazy idea you guys have heard about or maybe had yourselves that has potential for Indy?
So when we started this idea of having a pre-enactment, which is the 3-block long theater to kind of model what equity looks like, at first I was thinking that it would just make the neighborhood look better, but the more we've been involved with, I've realized that it's actually about changing behavior. It's not about the neighborhood looking better, it's about changing behavior. And so we've gone to the new businesses that have moved in, which have kind of worried me because they've started to move in before we've actually done this pre-enactment, and I'm worried that gentrification is already coming. And I've gone to them and I've said, how are you going to pre-enact? You're in this neighborhood now. How are you going to change your way of doing business? How are you going to be equitable? How are you going to be a good neighbor? And then, Emily's here from the Harrison Center. She knows that at the Harrison Center, we've had conversations now about how can we as individuals pre-enact? And how can I be the kind of boss I ought to be? And how can I be the kind of mom and wife and friend? And so I think that for the Harrison Center, we want to create a conversation citywide about pre-enacting that gets to people's hearts. Because it's not just about looking better, it's about changing our hearts and to interact and to change our city.
I actually usually think that today's crazy idea is just ahead of its time, and maybe it just needs that spark of momentum, or someone else needs to come into your world and rekindle it, or something happens in society or culture that shifts, and now your formerly crazy idea is perfectly timed. And I've seen that on a number of ideas that we've worked on at CICF over the years. You know, we've brought together like 14 people. That many of us were in the Netherlands together, and I know Joanna and Bill just got back from Amsterdam, and I'm a big believer, by the way, that we should all take field trips together, and we should spend the money and go travel together and look at really cool things and learn in the moment, and actually able to have the conversation in that moment of inspiration. So we try to actually manifest that at CICF, and we helped bring 13 people from Indianapolis to a week on bikes looking at bike infrastructure. And what came out of that was the fact that our city departmental leaders at DPW and other departments, so often, you know, as you heard Mayor Hogsett say, you know, they know there's no money, and so they actually do not have the freedom or the permission to think about crazy ideas. And so we actually, in a moment of desperation in Amsterdam, where our city partners who are wonderfully committed, you know, passionate, and they do suffer for their passion at the city, let me tell you, that they just could not let themselves think big. And so we jumped in, and a bunch of us, and we said, look, we're going to get together, and here's what we're going to do. If we had $100 million over 5 years to do the next phase of bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, which I think is a big part of networking people, and now we need to do it across neighborhood lines into disadvantaged neighborhoods. If we had $100 million, what would we build and where would we build it? And we actually are very close to having a plan of what we would build and where we'd build it that we would test. It's a draft because we need to test it to lots of neighborhoods and other people and see if I know we're off base in some areas. But here's the crazy idea. I think the Capital Improvements Board, which, you know, was not created not just for sports facilities. I don't, you know, have you been on the CIB before? I mean, it's not just for sports, it's for capital assets. Right. And I want to raise $50 million and get dollar for dollar match from the Capital Improvement Board. And you know what? In Indianapolis, that is one crazy idea.
You know, I think looking back, there's been every major accomplishment the city had started as a crazy idea. You know, if you think about the fact that we had the Super Bowl. In 1984, if you asked anybody in this community, do you think we'll ever have a Super Bowl? The answer was absolutely not. So it does take bold, aggressive, forward-leaning thinking and people who are willing to get behind it to push it.
Another question, specifically we're talking about investment. This one geared towards Christians specifically. What are the implications of $250 million in funding for Indiana State VC investments?
It's going to be enormous. It's going to be huge. And I know it's not going to be without controversy. You know, people, you know, we still have potholes in our roads. What are we doing with $250 million? But if you look at, Indy's probably the most mature tech economy in the country that doesn't have a legitimate Series A funding source. So we have no local money to invest in kind of Series A and later high growth companies. And that has two kind of negative impacts. I mean, the first, of course, is that hot money from outside, if it's a sufficiently good idea, will ultimately come in. But many of the spoils of that investment immediately go right back out. Oftentimes companies will leave our great state to go pursue capital. I mean, that's a very normal request, especially early on in the funding cycle for a VC to say, this is great, you know, but you need to move to the Bay Area, or even locally, this has been happening. That's great, but you got to move to Columbus, Ohio. And people do it because if I don't get that $2 million, I can't launch my company. Probably the worst aspect, though, is when these companies don't have access to scale-up capital. They end up not kind of leaning in or living into their potential. And so you end up with a community that builds lots of kind of little companies that have a much harder time changing the world. I mean, this will sound vulgar. Anytime we talk about money in hundreds of millions of dollars, it could sound vulgar. But it's these big kind of tectonic wealth creation events that happen through the context of business that powers a lot of change. And if you don't create the context for those businesses to emerge, the foundations, the charitable giving, the libraries, the annexes to the university, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, those don't happen there. Those things happen where those wealth creation events take place. And so to me, I don't have a crystal ball, so let's check back in 10 years and see how this all shook out. But if it goes well, as I expect it will, the return on that $250 million will be extraordinary. And not just the financial return, but the impact that's going to have on the people of Indianapolis, I think is going to be profound. Because these innovations, they're going to take shape. These businesses are going to launch. And we want that to happen. We want that to happen here because the ripple effect of that, it's almost incalculable. Again, when we talk about these exemplar cities, you look at Seattle, you look at Austin, no Dell computer, no Austin the way we think of it today. No Microsoft, no Seattle the way we think of it today. And so on and so forth. So it is my hope that if this next level fund reaches fruition, that's going to pay very, very big dividends for a very long time.
Well, let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you for coming. Thank you all. Real quick, big announcement. So EdgeX is our second annual leadership conference this fall. It'll be Friday, October 6th. There's save the date cards. It's 4 hours. We get you in, we get you out, 9 to 1. Our first speaker that we're announcing tonight, you can get tickets, is Mitch Daniels, Indiana's 49th governor and now president of Purdue University. So make sure you swing by. It's $20 off tonight, and you get a book as well if you purchase your tickets. We'll send a follow-up email as well. But thank you for coming out. Stop by the table, learn how to be a mentor, mentee, corporate partner, or an ambassador. And thank you for joining us.